This webinar is being live streamed. It's setting it up right now. You're amazing. I don't know if you can go on and like glance at it and make sure things look okay. You can shoot me a text. YouTube wants to show notifications, allow it to, because I may not matter in the context of this. All right, I'm gonna put. Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye. All right. I think we're all set up and ready to go.
Yeah, I think we are. I'm so happy to see you in person.
So good to see you in person. I feel like it just didn't happen enough.
I know it.
So I realized I did not set up slides for you. I can send them to this email and just talk. Okay. I was gonna say it's very chillable in the room.
It is.
So you actually need to speak at the podium.
Right. So people can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. That works for me. Whatever works best for y'all. Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming to join us on a school night to talk about wonky, nerdy policy topics. Thank you for those folks online, to the Oklahoma Policy Institute and to Together Oklahoma for being with us as well. My name is Damian Shade, and I'm the Executive Director of Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform. We are a nonprofit that I like to simplify our mission statement to that works to make a criminal justice system in Oklahoma that works. We want to make a system that's common sense, that really protects victims, that really reduces crime, and that really doesn't separate so many moms and dads from their kids with incarceration, that doesn't break up families, but that actually makes Oklahoma better. I think it's the biggest thing we're missing as a state when it comes to our criminal legal system. So many things about it just don't make sense. So first up, thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining this Together Oklahoma event. If you are not already plugged into the Criminal Justice Affinity Group, I hope that you will plug in and be involved in the 23 session. We desperately need you. Remarkably, it's something that I think a lot of people in small towns in Oklahoma forget, but the big city lawmakers are really used to hearing from people. You know, Tulsa lawmakers, they get the phone calls. Oklahoma City lawmakers, they get the phone calls. Sometimes in these small towns, though, they don't always hear from you all, and they desperately need to. They need your voices just as much as the big city folks need your voices, because your voices matter. They're truly important. And I think it's really important for you all to be part of the conversation. I want to talk about some of the successes that we've had in Oklahoma. When things started and I came into this work in 2017, 2018, Oklahoma was the prison capital of the world. We had the highest per capita incarceration rate on earth. In the time period that has elapsed since 2018, a remarkable thing has happened. We've been able to reduce Oklahoma's incarceration population by more than 20%. We've closed 3 state facilities in that time period and 1 federal facility. I like to say whenever a prison closes, an angel gets their wings. It's a remarkable fact, I think, that is directly a result of people like you around tables like this, teachers and business people, religious leaders, saying enough is enough. We've done the same thing the same way for so long, and it's not making our state better. So we changed direction. One of the remarkable moments in that time period was the largest single day commutation in American history, which a lot of you probably remember, made national news, that happened here in Oklahoma as a direct result of a voter ballot initiative that folks here across the state supported by about 60%. Since then, we have worked to deal with reentry systems for those people returning home from prison. We've done significant work around things like fines and fees. Last year, some of my friends at the Oklahoma Policy Institute and my organization were involved in a bill to eliminate almost all of the fees that are assessed to children in the criminal legal system, which is kind of a crazy sentence when you put criminal fees on a 12-year-old. Of course, we know 12-year-olds don't have jobs. That's mom and dad paying those fees, or as more often the case, that is, that's a grandparent, that is a foster parent, that is someone who is not in a position to pay to keep the lights on in courts. So it is the work that this coalition has done that really took about $1 million of essentially revenue that was being tax collected off of children in the criminal legal system every FY off of their backs. So that is a really powerful thing that I'm really proud of. And then one of the other things I definitely want to make sure and highlight, this last session, Oklahoma was one of 2 states in the nation to adopt a clean slate law. That is a law to create a computerized expungement system, which is just a really complicated way to say there's about more than 100,000 people in Oklahoma who right now have barriers to employment, housing, and education, that when the clean slate system is done, those barriers will be gone. For folks who don't know it, if you are justice involved in Oklahoma, your unemployment rate's about 5 times higher than the state average. If you are justice involved in Oklahoma, your likelihood of experiencing homelessness is about 10 times higher than the state average. So people in these communities need an economic chance. It's funny, so much of this is just about the common sense notion that if you're trying to do the right thing, you're trying to drop your kids off and take them to school and live your life and be left alone and leave others alone, the court system shouldn't make it harder for you to do that. Shouldn't make it harder for you to drive to work. Shouldn't make it harder for you to buy medication for yourself and your family. Shouldn't make it harder for you to feed your kids. And Oklahoma's clean slate law is one of many pieces of legislation that we've worked on in the last 4 years that will help hundreds of thousands of families across this state. So what's next? What are we looking at? I know my colleague, David Gately from the Oklahoma Policy Institute is going to talk in a little more detail about the things that we're hoping to do this next legislative session. But there's really 3 principles that are kind of the bedrock of the way that I think about our system right now. 1, treatment should be easier to access than prison. I'm going to say that again. Treatment should be easier to access than prison, right? The Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Use Services estimates that there are between 500,000 and 700,000 Oklahomans who need significant mental health and addiction treatment. Our current funding allows us to take care of about 1/3 of those people, 1 in 3. That means 2 in 3 Oklahomans who need that treatment, who need that care, are not currently getting it. It's something I like to say all the time to police officers when I speak to them. It's wild that if someone walked up to a Quick Trip or, I don't know what you guys have in Ardmore, if it's Quick Trips or if it's 7-Elevens, I feel like it's a battle between our counties, which we have. But if you walk into a filling station and you're out back and you buy some illegal drugs, there's no waiting at the county jail. You will go to jail that night. That's how it works. If you walk to a state-funded facility and you tell them, I am desperate, I am struggling, I don't think I'm in danger tonight, I think I can make it through the night, but I'm struggling with addiction, I'm hurting my family, I'm hurting my friends, help me. They will put you on a list. Sometimes it can take 4 to 6 months, I am told, routinely. No waiting at the county jail, 4 to 6 month waiting list for state-based treatment. And we are surprised when our mental health crisis becomes an incarceration crisis. We get what we funded. So treatment should be easier to access than prison. Second, poverty shouldn't be a crime. You shouldn't be able to go to jail or more likely to go to jail because you're poor. For those who don't know, in the state of Oklahoma, there are numerous counties where the median pre-trial jail stay, that is the time you sit in jail before you've been found guilty of a crime, is more than 6 months for people on average if they can't pay bail. Truly bananas. It's one of those things that we don't think happens in America, right? Sounds like something that would happen in a banana republic or some dictatorship. Happens all the time in the 77 counties in this state, and in several of those counties, it's happening on an average basis. The other piece of that I'd be remiss in mentioning is, of course, fines and fees. We know that there are millions of dollars of criminal court debt hanging over the poorest rural and the poorest urban communities in the state of Oklahoma. And there's no other way to describe it. It's a tax. It's a tax on poor people. It is a way to fund our courts, to fund our system on the backs of the people least equipped to deal with that. And then the last thing that I'll say here is Oklahoma's got to come up to the times. We can't live in the 20th century anymore. It's the 21st century, and our criminal code, that is the laws that are on the books, haven't been updated since the Backstreet Boys was a new band. Like that is what we are talking about. And for those who might remember that, that's more than 20 years ago, right? Like whether you like the Backstreet Boys or you don't like them, they are not new music. Our criminal codes shouldn't be older than the music groups we listen to. There's something fundamentally broken about that. And so it is critical for Oklahoma to have a system that ages with the time. So these three pieces: treatment should be easier to access than prison. Poverty shouldn't be a crime, and Oklahoma needs to move into the 21st century. These are the guiding rubrics for how I'm thinking about advancing things. And I'd love to hear from each of you what you all are thinking. I'm going to pass it over to David Gately from the Oklahoma Policy Institute to kind of expand and talk about what we're doing this year.
Thank you, Damien. Can everyone hear me okay out there? Awesome. Thank you for that setup. And sorry, everyone, I'm doing this virtually, but I'm just happy I get to be here and get to share with all of you. As Damien mentioned, I'm going to be talking about looking forward. What are the priorities that us as a coalition that cares about these issues and are working on this in the state, what are we thinking about for the next legislative session, whether that be on the issues that Damien talked about or others? So I'm going to dive into those. Let me see if I can pull up my screen real quick. Okay, are you able to see this? Okay, now let's see if this works. Okay, can you still see it? And can you not see my notes? Can you just see the... Okay, great. I can just see Damien, so I'm going to go with, he gave me the thumbs up there. Okay, so my name's David Gately, everyone. I'm the criminal justice policy analyst at the Oklahoma Policy Institute. Again, I want to thank you for being here. It's really great to see that people are interested in this issue, especially as we gear up for the legislative session. As Damien mentioned, it is so incredibly important, especially right now, to work on these issues, to get informed about these issues so that we can talk with lawmakers, really get some things changed. So I was tasked with going over some of OCJR's and our shared priorities for the next legislative session, like I mentioned. Hopefully just give a little bit of information about those issues so we can all be better informed. I'm not going to be able to go over everything in depth, but hopefully this is a broad overview of what we're working on, but also how you can help us get this stuff done, as I mentioned. So here's a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about. First, I want to do a quick snapshot of the current legal system, criminal legal system that's happening right now in Oklahoma. So all the progress that Damien mentioned, but just how is it working now? Where are we at in this reform movement around criminal justice? And then second, I'm going to talk about mostly this presentation will be talking about the policy priorities that I mentioned, Damien has mentioned, moving forward in the criminal legal reform area and where, again, we can get some stuff done. And then third, I hope I'll be able to have some time to take any questions or get any feedback that you may have. I too would love to hear more about where's your mind at on these issues and how can we work on them together. So let's start just there with the first part here of a snapshot of just some of the data on where we're at right now in Oklahoma when it comes to the criminal legal system. I think it's important because this helps guide us on where we can go next. It also gives us important context for that road ahead. Where have we been? What has worked in the past? Where can we go in the future? So I'm going to move through this part of it pretty quickly and keeping in mind some of the progress that Damien mentioned before on some of the reforms that have been successful. I think those are important too of understanding where we are and where we should go next. So let's start with, as was mentioned, Oklahoma's come a long, long way in incarceration over the last 5 years. So you can see on this chart here, this is from our partners at forward.us, who have done just phenomenal work in our state and nationally. But you can see here that from this graph in 2017, we had more than 28,000 of our neighbors who were currently incarcerated in prison at the time. So we were one of the highest, if not, and this time, the highest incarcerator in the nation, which then put us as the highest incarcerator in the world. That's really, really, really disturbing. But you can see here, this graph shows that prison population has begun to decline since reforms that were implemented in 2016 took effect in 2017. And then you can see where we're at now. It's a remarkable over 20% decline in the prison population since 2017. And again, it reflects the fact that the criminal legal reforms that were put in place, voted on by the people, voted on by their representatives, have broadly worked to reduce the incarceration population across the board. And that's particularly true for State Question 780, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute a little bit more. But that has been effective. It's working as intended. And this is a really good thing. This is a good story about incarceration in Oklahoma. And we need to keep this up. We need to keep thinking, how can we continue to reduce this population safely over the next few years? Now, that said, I think it's important to point out we still have an incarceration crisis in Oklahoma. And that's something that we have to come to terms with. All of the work that we've done over the last few years does not negate the fact that we still have higher incarceration levels than most every other state. And that's here. We still see that we have the third highest incarceration rate in the country, just behind Mississippi, Louisiana. This is a imprisonment rate per 100,000 people. We're still the second highest incarceration rate for women in this country. And as you can see there on the overall incarceration rate on the left side, you can still see we are significantly higher than the state average around the country. So the state average is about 315 people per 100,000. We're at 559 people per 100,000. So it's not even close to the national average. That's also true for the significantly high rates for women in the state average across the country. We have more than double that average in the state of Oklahoma. And I want to say that this higher than the rest of or one of the highest incarcerators for women, this has gone on for decades now. I think 3 decades we've held either first or second in this ranking. And so that's why this is still accurate to say we have an incarceration crisis in Oklahoma and more needs to be done. That crisis also plays out in who in Oklahoma we are sending to prison. The incarceration rate for Black Oklahomans is 5 times higher than for white Oklahomans. It's also true for Native American populations and Hispanic Oklahomans, where the imprisonment rates are still higher per capita than white Oklahomans. There's no explanation for this other than the racial disparities that exist at every step in the justice system. Not going to have much time to be able to go over all that, but I think it's just really important context to how we look at these reforms moving forward. Those racial disparities exist from interactions with police to arrest to the eventual potential conviction and sentencing. And these disparities are what is fueling the high imprisonment rates for communities of color throughout our state. That's also true for the reforms that have taken place over the last few years. I wanted to point this out because I think it's a really important piece. The disparities are also true for who past reforms have affected. We've seen declines in the prison population across the board, as I've mentioned, but we've seen higher reductions for certain groups of people, notably in this graph, Caucasians and Native Americans. In fact, these declines have actually exacerbated rather than reduced the racial and ethnic disparities in our prison population. Again, this is from our partners at Forward. So you can see here the reductions were largely concentrated in white Native American populations, where there's been a 25% reduction since 2016 to 2021, which is on this graph, and only 15% for Black Oklahomans, 12% for Hispanic Oklahomans. So I just point this out again. I think this is important to keep in mind as we think about reforms and solutions moving forward. Okay, so those are some of the problems that we still have, and namely, we're still in a crisis here in the state of Oklahoma when it comes to incarceration. But the good thing is that Oklahomans recognize this and recognize that there is more to do. So here is some polling data. It was commissioned through Forward again, that shows just a recent snapshot of where Oklahomans are at when it comes to their opinion of criminal legal reform. So this is important for lawmakers to understand, particularly as they seek to find solutions, but to enact the will of the people that they represent. So you can see here, Oklahomans agree with criminal legal reform broadly. The orange color there shows Oklahomans who say that it is important to continue to reduce the number of people in prison in our state. And you can see that this support is found across the board. There's an overwhelming majority in both parties and independents that support reducing incarceration levels in the state of Oklahoma. This poll is not dated. This is a recent poll. It's taken within the last year, in 2022. And I think it just shows that there is momentum to tackle this issue in our state. And we need to continue putting that at the forefront of our policy work. In fact, when you break it down even more, you can see that Oklahomans believe that the last few years of reform, so all of the amazing things that Damien has mentioned, that I've mentioned so far, it's only a good first step. It's a first step in the right direction, but they agree that more must be done. Very few people think we've gone too far, and a minority of people say we've done too much or done enough. So it's important to note that what I'm showing here is only about reducing incarceration, not all of the other reforms that can occur in the criminal legal system, such as reentry or supervision or crime prevention. So I'd expect these numbers to be even higher in support for those things. So that's the brief snapshot of where we're at right now. So let's move into where do we go from here? What are the priorities that we can get across the finish line during this legislative session? How can we use that public support that I just mentioned going forward? What are the priorities that have a chance next session and in future sessions down the road? So again, I want to point out this is just some of the shared priorities between Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, Oklahoma Policy Institute, and Together Oklahoma, and a broad coalition. It doesn't represent the entire universe of possible reforms in the criminal legal system, of which there are so many. It also doesn't represent everything that's necessary to make our criminal legal system truly about justice, about safety, and accountability. So I just want to preface that before we dive in. So we'll start with this slide that if you've been to other Oklahoma Policy Institute presentations, you've probably seen. I think this was actually created by Damien Shade in a past time, but I think it's for these reforms, we have to look at the system and where these reforms are taking place. So the priorities that we have affect every stage of the process, because that's what it's going to take to truly reform the system in the right direction. The process of a criminal case is not a straight line. It's not an easy, this is what happens, then this is what happens, then this is what happens. There are many tools, many decisions, points along the way. But just really quickly, you can see here, usually it starts with an arrest. That's when somebody is arrested for a crime that maybe the police officers showed up, maybe there was a warrant, but an arrest by law enforcement. And then the beginning of the prosecution. This is where the district attorney files charges, official charges, and the process begins. It ends up going through an eventual adjudication process. That's where evidence is gathered, witness testimonies gathered, if applicable. And importantly, this is the beginning of where plea deals become offered by the district attorney to criminal defendants. And I want to point this out because plea deals drive the entire process, mostly the entire process. 95% or more of all cases end up with a plea deal. It's not like what you see in the movies where everybody is going to trial and there's this back and forth. That's not what happens. In the vast majority of cases, it's the prosecutors and the defendant with counsel in a room coming up with a deal to end this without a trial. So plea deals are where district attorneys, sorry if you can hear that siren go by, offers a defendant a deal that usually lowers a prison sentence or maybe changes the ultimate criminal conviction, or maybe it removes prison time altogether. But this only happens if someone chooses not to go to trial, not to go by the right that they have to a trial, but to admit guilt and take a plea deal. It's also possible, you can see here, it's also possible that a DA dismisses charges at their discretion. Maybe if they don't have enough evidence, for example, they may just dismiss it. That said, for the majority of crimes, the process does not end up with time in prison, plea deal or not. Oftentimes, it ends up with some form of probation where someone serves their sentence in the community under specific conditions. Maybe they agree to a deal where there's no prison or conviction happens if they complete something like a specialty court program, like DUI court or mental health court or drug court. But while serving any of that time in the community under, say, probation, they serve it under supervision. And that supervision, you can see on the right over there, can be revoked if someone breaks the conditions of that supervision, meaning that if they break those terms, they can be arrested and sent back to prison for the remainder of their time or for the original sentence. And I point this out because, and I point out this whole process because our priorities, again, affect each stage of this process. I'm going to go over all of these more detail after this, but I just want to try to visually. Now, I'm not a PowerPoint or slide person, so these look kind of rudimentary, but I want to get the point across of where this is occurring. So an arrest, we want to find priorities that are engaged in crime prevention. We want to prevent arrests before they happen. That's all of the treatment options that Damien mentioned before. That's mental health programming. That's substance abuse programming. But then also you can see here, one of our priorities at Oklahoma Policy Institute is creating a minimum age for juveniles where they can't even go through the adjudication process until they're a certain age. So we can protect our youngest who may have been caught up in this system. We want to look at sentencing reform, and that's where people will have less time in prison overall. And again, I'm going to talk about all of these, but you can see we want to break these cycles before they begin. We want to invest when people are in a diversion program or a mental health court or a specialty court generally. We want to invest in those diversion and supervision programs. We want to engage in fines and fees reform so that when people get out and complete a sentence or they're on supervision for a sentence, that they're not being burdened by insurmountable court costs and court debt. And then last, we want to invest in reentry services too, because when somebody finishes their sentence, which the vast majority of people re-enter our society and come back to our communities, that they have the tools and resources that they need to start their lives again and stay out of prison. So that's the process. Let's dive into the priorities. I'm going to dive into some of them as well with a little bit more details, but I wanted to start by showing OCJR's policy priorities that they announced at a wonderful event a few weeks ago in Oklahoma City. I was able to attend that. So I'm just going to go over them. Again, these are OCJR's, but what you'll find is that Oklahoma Policy Institute, OCJR, and the coalition that cares about these issues, we're aligned on every single one of these. First, we should modernize Oklahoma's outdated criminal code, as Damien mentioned, with common sense sentencing reform. 2, we should make smart investments in community safety and crime prevention by finally funding State Question 781. 3rd, we should invest in families and communities by eliminating millions of dollars in criminal court fines and fees. 4th, we need to boost government transparency and accountability by making Oklahoma's criminal legal data collection a model for the nation. And then last, priority. Fifth, incentivize work by developing an employment-centered reentry and supervision system in Oklahoma. I'm going to dive into all of these, so don't worry if you're like, well, what does number 3 mean? We'll go over it. So here's ours, and this isn't our full list, but these are some that I wanted to highlight today, and then also point out one that is just one of our priorities as well. So first, we too want to fund criminal courts and court services through state tax revenue so that Oklahoma's courts are not reliant on fines and fees from some of the poorest Oklahomans. We should fund State Question 781, as I mentioned before, so we can increase access to mental health treatment, substance abuse programming, crime prevention services. And that means for every county in the state, not just our biggest counties, Oklahoma County, Tulsa County, but for every county in the state. And then one of our priorities is to establish a minimum age of adjudication that allows Oklahomans under a certain age to receive social services and what they actually need instead of being convicted and adjudicated in a juvenile court. These are some of our youngest Oklahomans who need this protection. And I hope that we'll be able to talk about this more in the future. It's not something I highlight much today, but I wanted to at least point it out. So again, these are just some of the priorities that we align with through OCJR and the coalition, and we support each of these priorities moving forward this legislative session, and we each have a different role to play in this process. So let's just start with the first one that I want to highlight today. What does it mean to fund criminal courts and court services through appropriated revenue so that Oklahoma's courts are not reliant on fines and fees from low-income families? This is our priority of fines and fee reform in the state of Oklahoma, which is sorely, sorely needed. Right now, the majority of court and court services are funded through these fines and fees. Now, I think it's kind of important to differentiate the two. A fine is what people think of as the punishment that comes with committing a crime. This is supposed to be the deterrent effect that, well, if I commit this crime, I'm going to owe a fine to the court. I'm going to have to pay it. A fee is just an added cost that goes to fund so many different things, including things like courts, district attorney's offices, county clerks, vital court services, like victim services, for example. So if someone doesn't pay these fines and fees, as I mentioned before, it can lead to an arrest warrant, and it can even lead to potentially time in prison and jail for non-payment. This issue affects all of Oklahoma. You can see there in the graph that I posted that with fines and fees assessed per capita, it actually harms rural Oklahomans most acutely. You can see Rogers County has the highest fines and fees assessed per capita. That's more than Tulsa and Oklahoma County, which is much larger. You can see that's way down the list. The yellow bars there are rural counties that this is affecting. And I think that is very, very important to point out to lawmakers and to our neighbors that this is affecting all of Oklahoma and rural counties especially. Many of this debt, or much of this debt, goes unpaid because people simply cannot afford to pay the fees, which creates a funding problem for our courts and court services. It also makes law enforcement just debt collectors for our communities. Also, I may have moved one over. Sorry about that. Also, we have to just reduce the number of these fees across and assessed across the court system. And we need to replace it with funding that's consistent and reliable budget appropriations so that our court systems and court services, law enforcement, are not perpetually underfunded when people aren't able to collect on the fines and fees that they've been assessed. There's multiple ways of doing this. One that we support and was most recently last session introduced was to repeal out millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars in fees that go to fund administrative agencies and things that have really nothing to do with the court, or sometimes even with the actual crime that someone is convicted of. So here I put an example. This is from statute. This is a real fee. So this is a fee for a simple drug possession charge. So most simple drug possession charges are now misdemeanors. There's a $100 fee that goes into a fund called the Trauma Care Revolving Fund. Now, Trauma Care Revolving Fund, vital piece of the statute, of the statutory code. We need this. We need to ensure that people are able to get trauma services when they need it. But why are we funding that off of a fee that has nothing to do with simple drug possession? So we're just create a dumping ground for fees and revenue to fund vital things like a trauma care revolving fund. Why do we not just fund it like we fund every other or many other vital services in Oklahoma? Why does it have to be off of the backs of some of the poorest Oklahomans? Last session also, there was a bill passed called House Bill 3925, which made it easier for judges to waive some court costs out completely, just reduce them to zero. We need to make sure that that is implemented correctly and that the working group implementing that stays with the law and make sure that it's actually truly about waivers of fines and fees. So that's just another policy note. But looking forward, we should ensure that people aren't going to prison and jail when they can't pay just for simply being poor, whether that's on a misdemeanor or on a felony charge. We should strengthen and make it easier for judges to waive out completely when somebody shows that they have an inability to pay. And then also falling into fines and fees. And as Damien mentioned this, I didn't put it here. I think it's important. We need to look at bail reform moving forward. It may not be this session, but that too is about criminalizing poverty and making the fact that the poorest of our neighbors are having to sit in jail simply because they cannot pay. That's part of this conversation too. Second priority is we need to finally, once and for all, fund State Question 781. Voters approved some of you may remember in 2016, State Question 780 and the companion state question with it called 781. This is in 2016. Really quickly, State Question 780 reclassified some crimes that were felonies to misdemeanors. Notably, simple possession of drugs became a misdemeanor. And this is important because felonies can carry and oftentimes carry prison sentences, while misdemeanors usually don't. So 780, as I mentioned before, led to less felony convictions in the state. It meant less people are going to prison, as you can see, as that continues to decline. And it has saved the state tens of millions of dollars in incarceration costs. Now, the companion State Question 781 required that the money saved, so that tens of millions of dollars saved from less incarceration, be reinvested into county level programs that treat things like mental health issues, drug abuse, and also crime prevention services in every county in the state. But that piece, 781, State Question 781, has never happened. The state legislature has never invested in State Question 781. Not a single dime of savings has been allocated to the appropriate fund. Not a single dime of savings has been reinvested in the county level. So the question is for lawmakers, where is the money that voters approved? And this was not by a slim margin or some fluke. This is a majority of Oklahoma voters. You can see there on that's the 100% all precincts reporting for that measure that night in 2016. So where is the money that voters approved? That's a legitimate question you should ask your lawmakers when you speak with them. So the legislatures tried to say it would be too difficult to determine the savings, or we just aren't getting to it, or whatever it may be. So groups in this coalition, including Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, Oklahoma Policy Institute, one of our data programs, Open Justice Oklahoma, we work together to come up with a formula to estimate the savings and ensure that we have a really good picture of what the savings from 780 are and how we should reinvest them. So now that excuse is no longer, that's not what lawmakers should be saying, because we know how much the savings are. We know for every year since implementation what those savings look like. So it's time now to allocate the savings and get the money in the hands of counties to help people stay out of prison and get their lives and their well-being on track. Now, this session, we need an initial investment, but we also need to think about long-term funding going forward, because once these programs start, we need them funded and we need them working at the county level. The people of Oklahoma voted for this. It's time for the legislature to do their job, carry out the will of the people. We've got to get this done. It's been over 6 years of state budgets without fully funding or funding at all State Question 781. The time is now to get this done. And that is one of our major priorities between our groups. This should also ensure that the guidelines for spending of this money is actually prioritizing local needs and best practices. We want to ensure that there are strong guardrails to make sure that this funding is being used for what the voters approved it for. One of the long-term funding paths, and I just want to point this out quickly, is we're looking at maybe using the revenue if State Question 820 passes. This is the recreational marijuana. There's a lot of money there. It's recession-proof, as we try to point out. This may be a path for long-term funding, but the point I'm trying to make with this is we need to get it done, and the excuses for not getting it done, whether it's we don't have the savings calculation or we can't think of future long-term funding, we have answers to that. It's no longer a viable excuse. We need lawmakers to get this done. Okay, third, we need to modernize Oklahoma's outdated criminal code with common sense sentencing reform. Prison sentences in Oklahoma have still continued to grow since all of the reforms in 2016, because we haven't re-looked at our criminal code, as Damien has mentioned, for decades now. We are working in a 20th century code in the 21st century. Mean sentences have increased by 28 months since 2016. Medium sentences increased by 36 months, which now puts it at 13 years as our median sentence in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's harsh sentencing laws are driving over incarceration of the state. It's worsening economic outcomes for people across the state. And it's doing all this as research has shown us that long, harsh sentences do not deter future crime. In fact, they actually probably increase recidivism moving forward. So the criminal code still allows, and prosecutors and judges continue to use it, extraordinarily punitive sentence terms for all sorts of behavior. The repercussions of these sentences result in longer prison stays, and also those prison stays reverberate. They have long-lasting downstream effects for decades and decades for our communities. Also, unlike other states, we don't have an organized criminal code with standard classification systems, prescribed sentence ranges, for example, for each of those categories. It's just kind of a free-for-all. Each crime, every sentence, it's listed individually with its own sentence range, and it creates a chaotic system. Most of the time, the sentence ranges are arbitrary, they're harsh, they're wasteful. It leads to sentences being different depending on where in the state you're charged, what county you're in, who's your prosecutor, who's your judge. Do you have access to a criminal defense attorney? Are the prosecutors more harsh? That's unfair, and that's not how to run a criminal legal system in a state. Also, I want to point out these sentences carry high fines as well, in addition to these high prison lengths. And so when we're thinking about how do we update this criminal code, we need to create a felony classification system that lowers sentence lengths to come into the rest of the nation. You can see the chart there that we have median length of stay that are much higher, in some cases 100% higher than the national average for sentences. We need to provide consistency across counties, and ultimately, whatever update that happens to the criminal code, it needs to show that it also reduces incarceration in the process to combat the crisis that we're seeing. We need to right-size criminal fines to ensure that they're not exorbitant. Some of them carry like $25,000 fine for some. How is that ever possible for somebody to pay off in a lifetime? And then also looking forward on this, not just this session, but we really need to figure out sentence enhancements, which are also incredibly destructive in Oklahoma. We need to also tackle 85% crimes, or what a lot of people consider violent crimes. We need to make sure that there's still accountability, but we need to look at those as well. And then also we have to at some point do the same criminal code update for misdemeanor reforms as well. Oklahoma Appleseed, if you were familiar with them, they did a really amazing report on misdemeanors in Oklahoma, and it's just really shocking. I don't have time to go into it now, but I really recommend checking that out. Also, I know I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to move through these last few priorities. I could talk forever, but the last few that I wanted to point out that we're working on too is number 4, we should increase government transparency and accountability by making Oklahoma's criminal legal collection a model for the nation. This is about data transparency. We have a black box at multiple points in the criminal legal system that we just don't have any data for. It's not tracked. It's not publicly available, whether that be at local county jails, whether that be on data on who are district attorneys charging, who aren't they charging, who are they offering plea deals to, who are they not offering plea deals to. We don't know that information. We need good, reliable data to help us guide lawmakers on decisions that are going forward. We need to know what's working, what isn't working, and where are the changes that need to be made in these policy areas. This is really about transparency. It's about accountability for government. So if you care about good government, transparency, accountability, knowing where your tax dollars are going, where they're not going, this issue matters to you. So finally, number 5, we must invest in reentry and supervision systems that incentivize employment and reduces recidivism. We've seen smart investments in career training in the past. We've seen it in occupational licensing just last session, which Oklahoma, this is a bright point, but Oklahoma is one of the best states for occupational licensing now in the country for justice-involved folks. And that's because of a reform put in place last session. But those investments are at risk of slipping away, and we need more of them. In the last decade, for example, Career Tech, which is a truly remarkable program in our prisons that are training people for the jobs after that prison stay, has seen a 30% decline in spending across the state in the last few years. We need to ensure that that keeps up with those investments. There's many ways of doing this, ensuring that reentry is successful for folks leaving prison. Things like Medicaid expansion, which the Department of Corrections is actively working on to ensure that every eligible individual leaving prison is signed up for and their Medicaid benefits are turned on when they are released. This is going to save lives as people reenter, and it's going to make reentry easier for them. And then also we should ensure that investments are made and that the implementation of the Sarah Stitt Act, which passed a few years ago, which makes sure that people leaving prison have documentation that they need, like IDs, birth certificates, the things that matter as they re-enter society and we know are important for things like jobs, housing, education. And then last, any supervision conditions, and I wish I could talk even more about supervision, but any supervision conditions, so conditions that are placed on you by the court, say you're on probation, that those are individualized and they're actually focused on success, not just causing more and more barriers to reentry for people. Okay, so those are our priorities. I went over time here, but I'd be happy to take any questions that people may have in the audience or online, or any feedback that you may have about these policy priorities. Again, I'm sorry I can't dive into all of them in depth, but I wanted to make sure that we at least got them in front of you and that you had an idea of what are we doing and where do we need to help this next 2023 legislative session. Here's my email as all, or if anyone needs it. And again, we need your help getting these things done. That means staying engaged with OCJR, Together Oklahoma, Oklahoma Policy Institute. These issues truly affect us all. So is there any questions out there before I end this up? No, I can't hear anyone if anyone's asking anything.
I can answer that question. So Roxanne asked, after 781 funding, will they be compelled? Counties be forced to do mental health courts and that sort of thing? And there isn't compulsion for it, but the way that it will work, there will be a large pot of money that the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Use Services will have. and counties will be able to apply for those funds like a grant program. So there have been a number of programs through the Department of Homeland Security, for example, on the federal level that are modeled like that take a list of attributes and best practices that you have to have in programs and say, hey, if you local government reach out to us and say, we want to do that and we will abide by these standards, we'll fund it. So it'll be much more driven by the counties. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we have a grassroots movement around this, right? Across the state, so y'all can hold your elected officials accountable for what they do with those dollars, for how they serve your communities.
And mental health court is a perfect example of how those funds can be spent if it makes sense for a county. Some counties have them, some don't. But this would be a perfect example of how that may be spent.
But they certainly can't spend them for roads and bridges.
You cannot spend those funds for roads and bridges. That is not the case. Any other questions? So a lot of those grants, will probably be announced to some extent after the process goes forward. We are talking about doing some type of public facing website that the legislature will have, similar to what they did with some of the ARPA funds, where they talk about the request project, and it's likely ODMH will as well have a public facing website to say, here are how some of the funds are being drawn down so far.
And
One more question. Is that going to be a grassroots effort at the local level, or will we appeal to state legislators to distribute the funds to the county and use them?
So the first thing we need to do is appeal to state legislators to sign the check.
Well,
Like that's step one. So far, there's over $70 million that's owed to Oklahoma taxpayers. We're not asking for that much next year, though we would happily take it. But the very first thing we have to do is advocate with the state lawmakers to sign the check. Once that happens, there will need to be some local advocacy with your local city council, your county commissioner, those sorts of folks to say, hey, these funds exist. Why don't we have a drug court if we don't have one? Or if we do, why don't we have a bigger drug court? Why don't we have a mental health court? Why don't we have a special services docket? List can go on and on and on for resources that your community and your counties now deserve. And there's no excuse to not invest in those resources if there's millions of dollars sitting in a fund. So that will really be, I think, the best way to kind of condition that advocacy. Start with the state lawmakers next year. And then once it's law, hopefully fingers crossed by next November, and that appropriation is in the FY24 budget, then you can start talking to your local elected officials going, hey, this money's here. What are y'all doing?
and that money can be used to establish re-entry programs, or are those all operated by nonprofits?
It can be utilized for reentry. So it's pretty broad. What will happen in the bill is we'll have kind of a broad list of language, and I'm sure ODMH will establish specific categories of eligible use. So things like employment assistance for people returning home from prison or jail would be an eligible use of the funding. There's just a long list. Services for people experiencing homelessness, especially where there's been interaction with law enforcement and that sort of thing. Absolutely an eligible use of funding.
it really is focused on local needs that make sense. It's not a prescription across the state coming from the legislature. It's about what do you need to prevent crime and create safety in your communities. That makes sense. It's not just relying on incarceration.
Yes, sir.
I've had to deal with a young, a man who's been homeless, mentally ill, and I've been helping him for about 10 years plus. And housing has always been a problem. And he spent a lot of time in the county jail.
Here in Ardmore. In Johnston County, okay.
He's a Native American, so he got out of state court and he wound up going to It's not a good thing to keep a person in jail. It's gonna cost you money, so nobody wants to keep a person who's gonna cost them money in their jail, and that's the county sheriff.
Mhm.
He doesn't want the wrong prisoners. So consequently, we're doing a lot of bad housing, putting the people in the jail. And then if they get out of jail, how do they get a housing choice voucher? Well, a housing choice voucher will pay you over $800 a month now,
Mhm.
but there's not hardly any housing choice vouchers, especially for people coming out of prison. They're at the end-
They're not even eligible for all of them. They're not even eligible for all those federal vouchers. Yeah, it's definitely something we want to work on. It's on the list.
And can I just point out, I hope I'm not interrupting anyone, but from that last speaker, there is an interim study this week. So an interim study is through the legislature, lawmakers call on experts. There's one on post-incarceration housing barriers on Thursday morning, 9 a.m. Tune in online. We also have a housing policy expert on staff here at Oklahoma Policy Institute who's thinking really hard about these issues. And it's absolutely something we have to tackle in the reentry space moving forward. Thank you for bringing that up.
Just imagine if in 1980, instead of declaring a war on drugs, the United States had declared a war on homelessness. Could you imagine how different our country would look today? Let's you had a question?
My question is, since the for-profit prisons in Oklahoma love high incarceration rates, will they be using their political clout to fight the reforms or stop them?
Oh, they already are, right? Like there are, we could have a longer conversation offline, but there are a number of pretty well-funded, what they call super PACs, and other groups that are parts of private prison lobbies, corrections association lobbies, law enforcement groups, fraternal order of police, like groups like the District Attorney's Council, that take sometimes tax money and sometimes private donations, blend them into a pot and use them to get aggressive prosecutors, aggressive sheriffs and deputies. They want to push things back, right? There's been a multi-million-dollar ad buy in Oklahoma about the idea of being soft on crime for the last year. That is all these groups working nationally, really more so than they are coordinating exactly in Oklahoma. But Oklahoma's catching part of that. We are absolutely. So that's why you all are more powerful than that money, because you actually live here. You're actually constituents and citizens of this state. That money speaks volumes, but it's not more powerful than a bunch of voters calling their lawmakers and saying, that's not my Oklahoma. Voters are the key to beating that mass money thing, because that's going to happen. They have a lot of money. And by the way, they are hurting. I don't know if you've seen it, but 2 private prisons have lost their contracts in the last 6 years in Oklahoma. You know why? Because they don't save money. They cost money for the taxpayer. But they've been able to use creative accounting to try and hide their real cost. They've had a difficult path here, and I hope that we can make life more difficult for them moving forward.
There's some questions online.
Super.
So is there a plan or a model of a program being considered for reentry in Oklahoma?
So right now, the reentry model that we're kind of looking at is somewhat similar to Arizona, where the system is really set up from the moment people enter an incarceral setting to begin asking the question, what are your aptitudes? What are you good at? What do you like? Very, very early on. So your case management plan is all wrapped up in that. What are you good at? What do you like? What your, if they're going to put you through therapy and work programs and other things, it's all organized around those goals. So you tell them like, hey, I really was a pretty decent mechanic before I, started selling. So I could probably do something mechanical in an electrician's field, be a journeyman, be a plumber, those sorts of things. They get you on a path early. Right now, Oklahoma has this really ad hoc system where it's like at some facilities, there's training and resources and options. At many facilities, there's not. At some facilities, there's classrooms and ways that you can get into shop and start actually working with your hands and learning a trade and changing your family's lives. And in many places, there's not. There's lots of people still exiting Oklahoma prisons with $50 and a bus ticket. And that is just a fundamental betrayal of the system, right? Like, even if we were jerks, even if we were all people who were like, I don't care about those people, they did crimes. Who cares what happens to them? Well, they coming back to your neighborhood. You want them coming back with $50 and a bus ticket, or with hope and a job prospect and something they care about, right? We can actually be completely selfish people and hope that those exiting our prisons and jails aren't being treated like that. So there are a lot of pieces to it. That's me really oversimplifying, but an employment-based reentry system, kind of like the Arizona model, takes employment and puts it at more steps. Kind of like that chain that David was showing, except on the other side of incarceration, right? This is someone who's in prison, beginning the process to reentry, stepping down, and then returning to their community. In those steps, we want employment for as many people as can access employment in that space for them to be able to. Yes, sir.
One of the other issues I think that's key is we all have trouble just managing the few dollars we make. People that have come out of prison have no experience managing money. And they don't have anybody that really wants to help them manage their money. How could something be created to have them have a go-to place or person where they can get money management skills and be given a good reason to manage what money they have?
Yeah, no, that's great. We really do need financial management courses. So for all of you all, a really practical action step, if you are people who are really invested in this, the pandemic has decimated the volunteers to the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. So a lot of the volunteers were older people. So obviously, like, that was a natural inhibition for folks wanting to be there. And then when DOC sort of closed its doors and stopped doing the badging procedure, there were churches that would regularly do badging events. There were nonprofits that would regularly do it. All that stuff stopped. So they are about, the last conversation I had with the director of the Department of Corrections, they're about 1,000, between 1,000 and 1,500 volunteers down from what they were in March of 2020. So if you are an educator or you are a person who is passionate about these issues and helping in some way, every month they have opportunities for you to get your security badge. You can volunteer, you can help. We are trying to get one of the goals that's wrapped up in this employment and supervision piece is over the next 3 years, we want to double the employment access for people who are currently in state prisons. We want to double it. Some of that will happen because there's iPads, basically. It's like a generic brand, but they're basically tablets that have been given to every inmate in our state prisons. Those tablets can be resources to connect them with job training, education programs, other GED programs, specialized trade programs, and then employers, right? If your case manager and your folks at your unit go, hey, this guy's been fixing our HVAC system as part of his career skills, career tech work. He is amazing. He is reliable. This gal has been working super hard fixing our electrical system or our plumbing as part of her work at Naval Bassett. When you get those sorts of reports, we need those reports to go directly to employers, where employers can say, hey, I'm a second chance employer. I've signed up with DOC to be on this list of people that you have. Let me know when you have really talented, really reliable folks. So the short answer of that is, one, if you're interested, please get a badge. and become a volunteer at one of our state prisons. And two, one of the things to advocate for when you're talking to lawmakers is that there should be an opportunity at every phase of exiting the system to get a job and to point you towards a better life, right? It's one of those things that I think conservatives and liberals both agree on, right? The value of work. And I hear from lots of people in DOC, I'm desperate to work. I'm in a situation where I can't get transportation to my job, if I'm on a minimum security or community supervision kind of situation. That's silly, right? Like, we have to be able to solve that problem. If the problem is a van from point A to point B, that's a problem we can solve. So it's those types of things that are barriers right now that we can absolutely break down.
And I would add too, is in your local community, support second chance hiring too. Support the organizations, the businesses that are hiring folks, because we need more of them across the state at every level, small rural counties to Tulsa, Oklahoma City. It's important to support those and show that the community's behind this work, because we need more of them. And I always think of, when we think of job training, I want to point out a really, really special thing I think DOC is doing, which is they are training truck drivers right now who are they are gaining the license to drive these trucks, male and female, at both prisons. And they're coming out making good money. They are making a livable wage. And we know this country needs more truck drivers. So that's just one piece where we need to do more of that in every sector of job training.
It's real.
I wonder if there's a list somewhere that can be accessed that shows the employers in specific communities who are hiring.
I saw someone just holding Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform. There it is. So we have a reentry resource guide.
Oh,
And in that document, if any of you have it, there is a list. It is not exhaustive. There are definitely employers we don't have on the list yet, but we are expanding it and continually working on and updating it. But there's a large list of second chance employers in there. So please go through that. If you know folks who need that information, lift it up on your social media and in your groups.
Well, it's resources in each county.
or whatever, yeah.
The Federal Bureau of Prisons has
Mhm.
a list of-
Okay.
Mhm. Yep,
I'm
they have a
thinking
great
that,
list.
You know, that you were talking about volunteers at the different prisons, teaching,
Mhm.
you know, that might be a good project for a Together Oklahoma chapter. You know, because there may be people in the Together Oklahoma chapter that are accountants or are bookkeepers or someone that could teach basic budget,
Mhm.
you know, how to balance a checkbook, you know, that type of thing.
Absolutely, yeah, and it is needed. Again, the biggest needs they have, according to the head of the Department of Corrections, physical space. That is places where they can have the classes, have the shops with the electrical equipment and those sorts of things. And then volunteers, just bodies who come in and help. Those are the biggest two things they need. Obviously, I can work on the physical space piece, making budget arguments and those sorts of things. But y'all and your time and your effort would be invaluable.
Good segue.
Awesome. So next up, I think Roxanne is going to talk about affinity groups. I'm going to trade you out.
Okay. Very good. I could listen to these guys talk about criminal justice reform till I die. I just never get enough of it. But what I wanted to talk about tonight, and Damien mentioned it, and so did David, and that is the Together Oklahoma affinity groups. We established the affinity groups after we did the listening sessions in 2021, not 1921, 2021. And I'm not that old, I promise. But what we learned was that people don't have the same passion for all areas. And so what Oklahoma Policy Institute always has their policy priority issues. And that is usually their issues is what our listening sessions are based on. But we have multiple choice questions within each category, like housing, criminal justice, health, care, whatever. We break it down and ask several different questions. And in 2021, what we did was we had them rank the answers. And so we could tell by how they ranked their answers within a policy issue area, what was most important to them. So we took the information that we received from all of the listening sessions, which we ended up with about 500 people completing our listening session. And so we contacted these people and we said, these are our policy priority areas. And according to your answers, this is the issue that you're most focused on. So we started our affinity groups. We have safe communities and criminal justice reform. That is the one I lead. That is my passion. And I could talk to Damien and David forever about it. We also have Healthy Oklahomans, which takes in, which takes in Medicaid, healthcare, that type of thing. We have Thriving Families. Thriving Families includes housing, taxes, minimum wage, that type of thing, stuff that affects people's families and whether or not they have a good life, that they're not in poverty and have someplace to live and their kids have a good education. And then we have one, and this is a very strong one, and this really came to us from the 2021 listening sessions, and it was even more focused on in the 2022 listening sessions. And I believe a lot of you in this group did participate in our 2022 listening sessions, but that is strengthening our democracy. That's another passion of mine, because I feel that every day that passes with us not paying attention, that's being chipped away, chipped away, chipped away. And if we don't start paying attention, it's going to be gone. So those are our 4 affinity groups. And I invite everyone in this room, everyone online, to join one of those affinity groups. These groups don't meet in person. They're statewide groups. They're all virtual meetings. And what we do is we gather together. And we have Oklahoma policy analyst who is focused in this area, like our housing analyst. David is our criminal justice analyst. We have a healthcare Medicaid analyst. They also attend these affinity group meetings with us. And what they do is they go through the bills that we're following, where they are in the system, whether they've just been introduced, whether they're in committee, whether they're going to be heard on the floor, whatever step the bills are. And then they tell us what action at that point in time we as grassroots advocates should be taking. We also invite the people who attend the meetings to sit in on the committee meetings, either in person. You're welcome to go to the Capitol and do it, or go to the House website or the Senate website, and you can view any committee meeting that's going on. There's a schedule, a daily schedule, and you can see which ones are going to be heard that day. Same way on the floor. If the bill is going to be heard on the floor, there's a schedule, an agenda of what's going to be heard on the floor that day. And you can set and you can listen
And it's actually quite comical to just sit and view some of those floor sessions. But anyway, I really enjoy doing that. But that's what we do. We want the people who are involved in our affinity groups to take a little bit of ownership. And we want them to sit in on or listen in on the floor sessions, sit in if they want to. The committee meetings, the interim study that's going on, like David was talking about, that's coming up Thursday. You can find any of those online at the OK House website or the OK Senate website. Most of these criminal justice interim studies are in the House right now. And that's where you'll be able to find that one on Thursday. But at the same time, we want them to watch those and listen to them and then come back and report to us. If they are, it's not that they receive assignments, but if they're truly passionate about something, then they will want to do this and then come back and tell us what they learned. Because everybody doesn't have time to listen to all of the committee meetings or, watch all the floor sessions. So they just kind of have a little bit of skin in the game that way. And also, the affinity groups are really focused around the Oklahoma policy priority issues. But at the same time, within the affinity groups, if there's someone in the affinity group who, say in the Healthy Oklahomans, if they are more concerned about women's health and there are specific bills that are going through the legislature and they want to follow those bills and have them included in the bills that we're following, yes, we will do that. We invite them to bring a passion to the group that may not be part of Oklahoma policy's priority issues. But at the same time, if they want us to follow it, they have to participate in following the bill. They have to report to us on what they learned that week about the bill, about where the bill is. And we don't expect them to go out and organize grassroots efforts or on their own. We will help them do that. If there's stuff locally that's going on in your community that you want help with, you don't have to do that on your own. We will always help you with any, and that's what the chapters are for. But mainly the groups, the people in the groups, we want them to be involved. We want them to learn how to talk to their legislators and not feel intimidated. We want to give them information so when they do go or call or email, they will have the data and the information behind them so they can talk intelligently. I think that's what confuses a lot of people. They don't know about a subject, and so they're afraid to do it. That's our job. In these affinity groups, we provide them with all the information they could possibly need to reach out to their legislators and to make good arguments why or why not something should be passed. So it's mainly our hope just to develop advocates that have a deeper commitment to seeing the change made that they want to see. Because we all deserve an Oklahoma where all people have enough to eat, have a place to live, aren't put in jail just because of the zip code they live in. There's a lot of good about Oklahoma, but there's a lot that could be enhanced and made better. So that's what our affinity groups do. And I invite everyone to reach out and get involved. And I think Vita's up next.
Let me log in. So I want to show you how you can sign up to be a volunteer and be a part of one of the affinity groups or volunteer with OCJR. Oh, no, who is this? Not that, that's not it. So if you go to our website at okjusticereform.org and you click about and then go to opportunities, you will see volunteer profile, okay? And this is a way that you can show us what type of engagement opportunities you're interested in. So you click on that and you're going to see something like this. You will see this exactly. So now turn away, don't look at my, I'm about to log into my account. Just a moment. Give me 1 minute. Don't steal it. Oh, no, don't do it. Okay. So I'm going to go to. All right, so I'm going to go through an interactive form. So if you're at this page, you can create a username for yourself, put in your email address so we can reach you. And then you can create your profile. So whatever your username you want it to be, a password, address, that's all pretty straightforward there. And put in your birthday so we can celebrate you when it's time as well. And the next page, you can indicate for us what your availability is. So opportunities will come up and we know, like, if you're not available in the mornings, we're not going to reach out to you for an activity that's in the morning, right? And then here you can put your general interest. So you can, a lot of times we often have advocates that speak at interim studies and share, how our policies are actually affecting them, or on a webinar or a podcast or at a community event. So if you're interested in something like that, then you would click, I'm interested in speaking opportunities, or community outreach. Community outreach will be like helping to educate, recruit, or involve others in criminal justice reform. So there's a wide range of activities that will fall under that. An advocacy group, that's where you will find one of your Together OK advocacy affinity groups, or one of our multidisciplinary groups, cross-disciplinary groups that are going to come up eventually, which we'll share with you more about at another time. We're also working on a project called the Square One Project to reimagine justice. And we love people to get involved from the community, whether it's artists, whatever you may be, to speak on this issue and share your thought and perspective. So that's another opportunity, as well as we have a fellowship for college students. And then we have an ambassador program for people that have been impacted by our justice system, that have lived experience. So you can indicate what your preference is, what you're interested in. If you are a social media guru, let us know so we can know that as well. And then you can also indicate if you have been impacted by a justice system intimately, gender, race, ethnicity, or if you want to upload any documents. And then you would just submit your application there. And so once you do that, I'm going to show you what you're going to see. Once you submit your application, let me get out of here. And I'm going to switch to what you would see here. So this is my profile. So I can upload a picture of myself. I want people to know what I look like. I can, I will see here, over here, upcoming shifts. I can see what I've signed up for. I'm going to show you how to sign up for opportunities. So you go to this tab, opportunities, and you can look at actually opportunities a couple different ways. Oh, I have a problem here. So you can look at it as a calendar view, scroll down, and you can see, okay, these are the opportunities that are coming up in November. We'll have more. We just relaunched this, so there'll be more up there, okay? If that's confusing for you, you can also, if you prefer, look at it in a list view. Let's see if it'll let me do it. So list view, and so I can click on this one. I'm interested in attending the community conversation, right? And so I can click on that, and when I click on it, I'll see what time it is, and then I can say, you know what, I want to do this one, and I can select it. And let's see here. Here, select. I need to look on it this way. And it will assign it to my profile. So then I've essentially signed up for it. And so when I went back out, when I went to my profile before, you saw that I had upcoming shifts, right? And so this will tell me all the different shifts that I've signed up for, or different opportunities I've signed up for. As well, you can put in this is the schedule of, you know, the opportunities. This is just another way to look at it. Okay, I've signed up for 2 different things, all the different things I've signed up for, once in January, earlier this year, and now one coming up, right? And then I can see the hours. This, you don't need to worry about this right now. This is only if you need credit for your volunteer program, and then you can see what hours you worked so that you can submit that to whatever organization. And if you need to contact the administrator, who right now is me, you can reach out to me on, if you have questions like, what the heck is going on with this platform, then I will get this message and I will reply. Another thing is that you can also, there's a whole menu here where you can actually indicate like, okay, I want to subscribe to this. So I know whenever they upload a new activity, I'll get a message about it. And so you can just come back there. So I encourage you to, to explore it. For the sake of time, I'm going really fast because I want Angela to get up here and tell you about some of our partners. But yes, please go to this, explore it, create your profile, sign up for one of the affinity groups, you can attend one of our events. We need your help. We're all in this together. We need your voice heard. And so we're here to help, create that platform and that launching pad. So anyway, I'm going to turn over to you in like 2 minutes. I'll try to get through that very quickly. All right.
And I won't keep you long. I was thinking about, David said something in his presentation about it being, the time is now. And Vita and I looked at each other because our theme for this evening, which I think could be a reoccurring theme, is it's time for action, it's time for change, it's time for justice. So the time is now, and this is just real quickly, I just want to give you some ideas. Sometimes we come to these meetings, we hear a lot of stuff, and we think, okay, when we leave, what can I do? So I heard all this stuff and I want to do something, but what? Vita's given us one really good, easy way to use. Talk to her after. I'm sure there's something back there where you can sign up. We're going to load up all our stuff on that calendar too. Both Damien and David talked about coalition. There's so much work to be done, a whole lot of work to be done. And there's no way Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, OK Policy Together Oklahoma, and can do it by ourselves. So there are some other organizations that I just want, you might jot them down if you're interested, that you might want to consider volunteering some time. Now, the best are in the room. Sorry, guys out there in virtual land. But really find something that's important to you and spend some time. There's an organization called Prison Fellowship. It is the nation's largest Christian-based organization providing services to prisoners, former inmates, their families. It is kind of what I would consider a direct service type organization. So like if you wanted to help them learn how to do a budget or, provide any kind of reasonable assistance to help people get acclimated back in the community, Prison Fellowship may be an opportunity for you. You can Google all of these and they'll give you contact information. Similar to that right here in Oklahoma, and Damien mentioned it when they were talking about volunteers, there's the Oklahoma State Prison Ministries. It's another faith-based organization that's out of the Oklahoma Baptist State Convention. And they have, every church in their convention has a prison ministry. They train you, they walk you through it. So you think, I don't know what to do. I'm scared to go to McAllister, sign up, get a badge, whatever. You go with a group and they provide services, not only in the prison, but they do a bang up job. Christmas time for kids, families, the whole scheme of things. So those are two faith-based organizations. Another organization is called Americans for Prosperity, and they're really committed to ensuring a fair and equitable justice system, a criminal legal system. If I can say this, for some of us, may lean more to the conservative end of things. So if you think, well, I really don't feel like I fit with some of these other organizations, they might be a bit more progressive than maybe I think. Damien said it, David said it. These are nonpartisan issues. People who are Republicans and Democrats and independents and everywhere on the spectrum understand how important this is. But that is another organization that you might decide you want to get involved with. Another group is called Right on Crime, right, RIGHT, Right on Crime, and they really are focused on data-driven solutions. They do a lot of work in information gathering and how to use that information to make sure that the economic burden of the legal justice system is not overburdensome. So, and they do several other things, but it's really a data-driven organization. And then there's Oklahoma Appleseed that got mentioned earlier today. It's fairly new in Oklahoma. Appleseed is not new across the nation, but it's new in Oklahoma. And they're doing some direct service stuff too. Coalition to support survivors, intimate partners of violence in the justice system. So if you have a heart for victims of domestic violence or violence in the system, and you want to really, in particular, women who have been victims of criminal justice and choose to defend themselves and then find themselves in the legal system. If you have a heart for people like that and want to provide some support and encouragement, assistance, Appleseed might be a good fit for you. And then I want to mention the last two, Healthy Minds. Healthy Minds is kind of a research policy group that kind of helps all of us in informing our advocacy work. You know, they provide a lot of information, newsletters and other stuff that encourages and teaches how all of us might be better advocates. And with that, I want to mention the last two that are present in this room, the Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, you know, doing bang up work, focused solely on how to make this legal justice system better for all of us. Damien said it better than any of us can. So sign up here, Vito will get your information. You'll have a direct tie right there to us. And then everybody in the room knows Roxanne, our affinity groups and Together Oklahoma. It's a great way to do some hands-on stuff. So you want to be in the trenches and at the Capitol and, you know, making sure your voice is heard. Roxanne is right. Affinity groups meet virtually because they're all across the state. But my hope is this session, we can bring all those criminal justice advocates from our affinity group across the state to the Capitol on that particular day when all these organizations are there knocking on doors. And we might just show up when everybody else is not there. But certainly we may decide to coordinate an action day at home when we know legislators in home districts. So if you're interested in real tactical kinds of strategic actions in districts, our affinity groups might be a place, and our TOK chapter is a place for you to be involved. So I don't know who's ending this program. Damien, you coming back to say goodnight to everybody, Vita? Well, I'm closing this. Oh, I am closing us out. That was my task. So all that you've heard today, people online and in this room, understand Damien said it best. We do have the power. But power unused results in a powerless people. So understand the power that you possess, utilize it well, make a difference in people's lives. And let's go forth from this place today, understanding that if our voices are not heard, if we do not speak, we are powerless. But if we do not speak, I said this before, maybe we deserve the things that happen to us. And I just say that kind of facetiously, but give that some thought. Give that some thought. So we have to take action. Collective action is how we make real change happen. So the time for justice, it's time for change, it's time for justice, and the time is now. So God bless you all, and thanks for being here tonight. I don't know how to turn it off. And I don't know how to turn it off.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, David.
Bye, Damien.
Thanks so much.
Bye, David.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to everyone. I am not.
Okay, good.
I have, I'm staying in OKC, Man, I didn't even think about staying in Ardmore. That's interesting. I didn't even think about. Oh no, I mean, just didn't even think about it. It's such a strange thought. I've got meetings. I got meetings in the city tomorrow. Yeah. Well, no, it wasn't like a negative thing. It was just a thinking about driving there.
Oh, that's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot. Well, you gotta pull over. Okay, I'm going like that. Just pull over. Get out. Go stop it. Go to the service station. Get out of the car. Get a drink. Move around. I used to drive 3,500 miles a month on the average. I was a traffic city manager. I would drive. I was younger. But I was running between my circuit, Langston, Foley, going to Lima, Tag, from home. And so I had a route, Illinois lands, all of them were small towns. Langston was the biggest, 600 people, out of town with 214 people. So I mean, literally in the middle of no Clearview. We go I-40, and go about 20 miles south. And it's nothing. Absolutely nothing. And I just quit saying nothing and nothing. So I would spend Okina when we had I spend nights in little bitty rural towns. And I mean, I was kind of a kid. That thing happened sometimes. I'm 67 now, but then, okay, then that was 1981. So, born in 55. So, I mean, yeah, late 20s, early 30s, late 20s, because I came into that. So, it was just wild. I mean, but my mama was always very back in lost, that somebody was going to steal me. I had a new book that I was always so I know from getting there, you can be scary. So we'll sit down with Eva. This is really great because it's so much work and key for us. And we remember the coalition. Yeah. I mean, attend the same amount of money. So just to make sure the coordination is there. I'm just so glad you're where you are.
Not too long ago, so I met with the president and CEO of Francis Tunnel. And they have this program where instead of sending people to prison, they get to go to tech school, and they're separated, right? They're separated out by gender. They go through the whole program, and by the time, like, instead they go to house arrest and stuff like that. This is in Oklahoma City.
The courts, my symbolism there.
That has to be community sentencing. It's like an alternative sentencing. But by the time they graduate, they get jobs at Tinker, starting around like $19 an hour. And so instead of sending people to prison, send them to school instead. So it's like I would love to the person who is over that program, the head of all of it. I would love to connect. Yes. I don't.
I got it.
Okay.
I got all these copies.
But I love the sense of it.
To someone earlier.
Yeah, I got
Yes.
So what person is this art for? I'm a adult person, right? I'm a person who lives in Tulsa. So the couple folks told me they don't tip me art more. They were here. I was like, y'all okay?
All the surrounding counties.
I need to go home. I'm so tired.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's great.
okay.
I never expected them to come out on a school night.
We're not school age.
Your kids aren't in
We don't
school.
have kids. They're gone.
I know, I've had some good conversations with Tammy in that town room. Yes. I know she was
I haven't had
frustrated.
anything.
I had some good conversations with her, though, at least on the criminal justice space. I know there's a lot of stuff that you disagree with her on. But in this space. she does
Just
seem-
everything she does and says. When she went in on that, baby formula at the border.
I don't know if I saw this. What was that?
She wanted there. She wanted the governor and the attorney general to send a letter to Joe.
Oh, that would be fun.
To get that baby formula. And bring it back here for these.
I never heard about it. How long was talking about? Was it like a Fox News thing?
You know.
You heard about that?
She did a big thing.
Made a whole big show about it.
And there were several of them that were signing on to it. It was nothing.
Retention, right?
I've always-
Fundraising.
And so just announce that. There's no baby shortage, baby formula shortage in Oklahoma. And she said, well, my constituents.
Here. Yeah.
And we still.
They tried to several years ago. When the judges. didn't
Everything
want
going
it.
on, so I wanted to become accustomed to getting out to the ditch. You know.
You have to build that relationship. It takes time. It's funny, we don't realize it. They're just like us. I tell people all the time, if you're on, I don't know if you're on Facebook or not, but if you have 100
Well, the
Facebook
stress
friends, that's the Oklahoma legislature. Like seriously, just think about it. On Facebook. There's probably about a certain percentage of them that you'd be really happy if they were in charge. But those are good responsible people. Then there's a whole bunch of you like, oh Lord, don't ever let them. They would be the worst people.
And they got it now.
It's like, it really is like your Facebook friends. Where it's like some of the people you're like, oh, it'd be great for them to be in charge. And some of the people would be horrifying. And a lot of them don't even know why they're there. You know, they thought like this would be a good opportunity and then to give them financial was a lawmaker back in the day. And so, do some community service and it won't be an intense thing and they don't even understand the point, right? They see, they think about, maybe they're thinking about roads and bridges, maybe, you know, maybe they, I'll lower taxes and roads and bridges, and then they sit them in a committee, it's on education, healthcare, and they're lost, you know? It's a lot of leaders, right? To help them be people when they get on the other side. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here.
And like the last day, they were down in Denton.
Mm.
And so we drove down there and got to hear him and meeting all the pictures and.
So I've had the honor and privilege of hosting Doug twice. So when he first came through Oklahoma City, I used to be the president. We got to talk to him for like a coffee shop. Second time.
We met a girl there. She was living currently in
Yeah, I would not have guessed you would probably go for great.
has been writing letters since 2016 and still writes letters, has never met him until that day. By the time we got like, we were probably this close and she was already. She's like, girl, like, get the picture.
So I got to see him at presidential debate. Before I was born.
I was not even a thought.
So, we went to the LRJ in 2019, and we were hoping to see their meeting, but that's they dropped out, but he was there in Iowa. Him and his people had already rented out a bar there.
Yeah.
So him and his people met at the bar. Got wrong. That's how. The people at the bar knew they were, was like, let them stay. And let them stay there and sleep it off, and then.
You pay the money.
Yeah.
You might as well use the campaign.
That's exactly what they were saying, like, man, we already did it.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
This is my 16-year-old, but she's his They were all in character. So this is the one. It's Halloween. It's Halloween. And as we said, we need more candy. And none of them candy, but that one. So they were all involved. They were just a lot of knocking on people's doors.
We went to trick or treat.
Yeah.
Just over the library on Friday.
See, that's it. Doesn't matter what they say you get stuck too in the car.
Yeah, unfortunately it was raining, so they moved us all in.
Inside.
Yeah, but there was a mom that was dressed as a screw up, and she had a kid that was probably about this tall, that was, you know. But then the baby, and her guys were like that, and she was so cute.
My phone, this is their first, that's it. For dinner.
Oh.
And in Canada, they go, little long, and you know,
There we go.
yeah, it's all raw.
However much you need.
That's right. You got it. Okay, well, I'm glad you're here.
Might take some of the same on
Yeah, so what you do? What you got?
No, I'm getting stuff.
You better grow it.
Just try to look this. I don't know if I'm gonna get on with my child. That's enough Halloween here. I'm worried about the sugar impacts that will come from the Halloween. I would 100% take it.
Okay.
You know, take candy and just trash it one day or.
We let her have it for a bit, like, so when she, my daughter's 3, so when she goes poo-poo and like does the stuff she's supposed to do, she needs a little chocolate, like. She's an incentive kid, right? Like you give her that incentive, she'll say it's funny. She'll go on the potty all day.
I don't know, but I have no idea, so I'm just,
I was like, oh, you know, you.
Now, Haley's like,
Yeah.
we all have, maybe once a year we go to it.
She would negotiate.
Okay. I feel like that's the level my daughter's on. She's ready.
She negotiated with her teacher.
Like, I know how this arrangement works. I did in my part. I do expect some time. Guys, you did a good job. That was your nurse. Just cool. Some people over here work for me. Like, y'all came from.
Yeah.
She already had a savings account, CD, and knew what to do, and so.
If you can come,
If they
then come
go,
too.
yeah, and like, people that are like,
Take it to the window.
you know, that's really important.
You know, the Grace Center has those classes that people can take to learn, like budgeting and how to balance a checkbook.
I was listening to Damien and he was talking about, talking about the case managing doing this and getting